원이에요? 네. 10,000원이네, 10,000원.
여러분들이 전혀 경험하지 못한 장난감들이 억수로 많이 있습니다. 가서 보시면 깜짝 놀랍니다. 아마 왕복을 비롯한 뭐가 왕보다 2층에 억수로 많이 있습니다. 억수로. 가서 보시면
Tonight, 4 candidates will once again appear on the debate stage to address issues such as social division. With the presidential election 11 days away, the latest opinion poll shows the DP's Lee Jae-myung in the lead, with the PPP's Kim Moon-soo narrowing the gap this week. The U.S. is reportedly reviewing an option of relocating more than 4,000 American troops from South Korea to elsewhere in the Indo-Pacific, raising questions about what this could mean for regional security if realized. South Korea and the U.S. wrapped up the second round of tariff talks in Washington, focusing on 6 areas where the U.S. has reportedly addressed non-tariff barriers. The final deal will be sealed under the new government in Korea. It's May 23rd, 7 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We're coming on the air this evening an hour earlier than usual before the live presidential debate. And before that debate, which will cover societal issues, we begin our coverage with a gauge of voter sentiment. A recent survey by Gallup Korea shows that the liberal contender Lee Jae-myung is leading the polls, while his conservative rival Kim Moon-soo gained approval from a week ago to narrow the gap. Our political correspondent Oh Soo-young has the details.
With just 11 days until the June 3rd presidential election, the stakes are higher in the final public opinion polls and the candidates' televised debates. Gallup's final survey conducted this week shows the Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung is still ahead with 46% support. But compared to a week earlier, his approval dropped 6 points, while his main rival Kim Moon-soo of the People Power Party has gained 7 points, narrowing the gap between them from 22 points to 10. Meanwhile, the Reform Party's Lee Jun-seok saw his support jump to 10%, marking 2-digit figures for the first time in this race. The final National Barometer survey on Thursday showed a similar trend. Lee Jae-myung lost 3 points, while Kim Moon-soo and Lee Jun-seok scored higher ratings at 32% and 10%. It seems conservative and moderates have been solidifying their votes as election day draws near. The gap between the main liberal and conservative candidates shrunk to about 1/3 of last week's level in the Seoul capital region.
If you look at the regional voter distribution released monthly by Gallup Korea, Conservatives actually outnumber Progressives. Given this numerical advantage, how actively Conservatives are willing to vote in this election is, in my view, critically important.
Among independent voters who don't affiliate themselves with any party, preferences for the DPM reform candidates was neck and neck, while the PPP contender fell to 3rd place. Younger Koreans, regarded as swing voters, also made decisive moves. Among voters aged 29 and under, support for reforms Lee Jun-seok jumped to 26%, closely behind the DP's Lee Jae-myung's 30%. The PPP's Kim Moon-soo was significantly behind at 19%. As all candidates aim to solidify their support base, the number of respondents who said they could switch the candidate they vote for fell 1 percentage point to 16%. More than 8 in 10 people say they'll vote in this election. According to the MBS survey, voters believe the biggest task for the new president will be reviving the local economy, reforming the structure of politics, and reducing social conflict. The leading presidential hopefuls will hold a second televised debate on Friday night, focusing on societal issues. Regardless of their preferred candidate, Korean adults under 40 believe the Harvard-educated Lee Jun-seok performed the best at the candidate's first live debate last Sunday, which touched upon trade and the economy. Those in their 40s and 50s who are left-leaning overwhelmingly back the DP candidate, and those over 70 believe PPP's Kim Moon-soo had outshined others in the TV debate. 오수영, Arirang News.
Presidential hopefuls are gearing up for tonight's second face-off, having spent the day with minimal campaign activities. The DP's candidate wrapped up his trip to a southeastern village, where he paid tribute to late President Roh Moo-hyun on the 16th anniversary of his death, while the PPP's candidate attended a prayer breakfast in the morning, calling for unity. Our correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
The rival parties' presidential candidates scaled back their campaigns on Friday ahead of their second televised debate this evening. Instead, Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung wrapped up his trip to Gyeongsangnam-do province after paying tribute to the late Liberal President Roh Moo-hyun on the 60th anniversary of his passing away.
While paying tribute to former President Roh Moo-hyun, I reaffirm my commitment to building a country where the people are respected as the rightful owners and can live happily.
Lee met former President Moon Jae-in for lunch, during which Moon said now was a crucial time for South Korea and urged Lee to take responsibility in creating a country that respects the people. With just 11 days to go to the 21st presidential election, key political figures from across the political spectrum gathered in Bongha village, located in the city of Gimhae. Attendees of a memorial service included former President Moon Jae-in and his wife, National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik, and People Power Party interim leader Kim Yong-tae. In a social media post, Kim said former President Roh Moo-hyun put the country and its people first beyond political affiliation, and said he would remember those hope for a world without injustice or privilege. Meanwhile, the PPP's Kim Moon-soo attended a prayer breakfast for the nation and its people, where he emphasized unity, saying that economic struggles and social division have worsened conflict. The PPP said Kim's support is growing and expressed hope that he could lead in the polls before early voting starts if the trend continues.
In the end, Kim Moon-soo's distinct character, proven skills, and clear vision will bring him victory. As the election passes the halfway point, support is starting to pick up across the country.
With the candidates set to fully resume their rallies after the debate, they are expected to put their utmost efforts into the final week of the official presidential campaign. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News, Gimhae.
Shifting gears, the U.S. is reportedly exploring the option of relocating more than 4,000 American troops from South Korea to elsewhere in the Indo-Pacific. The idea is yet to be confirmed by President Trump, but raises concerns over security on the Korean Peninsula. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Yoon-ji covers this report.
The U.S. is reportedly considering withdrawing around 4,500 American troops from South Korea to Guam or other locations in the Indo-Pacific region. That's about 16% of the total number of U.S. forces in South Korea, where there are roughly 28,500 troops. Citing defense officials familiar with the matter, the Wall Street Journal reported on Thursday that the idea is being developed by the Pentagon for consideration by Trump as part of an informal policy review. While adding the proposal has yet to reach Trump's desk, it said this is one of several ideas under discussion by senior officials. Since his first term, Trump has considered changing the U.S. footprint in South Korea, which relies on close coordination with American forces to deter threats from the north.
It depends. We pay for military over in Europe. You know, we don't get reimbursed by much. South Korea too.
But the head of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command has presented negative views about the idea of a troop drawdown in a Senate hearing last month, saying the loss of the force on the Korean Peninsula would mean a higher probability that North Korea would invade.
As General Brunson said, North Korea's development of advanced nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles pose a direct threat to our homeland and our allies, and are executing a deepening cooperation with Russia.
Trump has been hinting at an attempt to renegotiate a deal on sharing the cost for American troops stationed in Korea, saying Washington cannot be taken advantage of any longer in military and trade. He's described South Korea as a money machine, insisting that Seoul should be paying $10 billion a year. Experts suggest pulling troops out of Korea could mean the Trump administration is looking to redeploy them to areas that better align with priority goals, such as countering China.
What the United States is saying is, we're currently focused on China, so we want our allies to take responsibility in terms of conventional defense capabilities, while we are willing to fully support in areas such as nuclear deterrence. And in return, the U.S. is asking for help in preparing to respond to potential conflicts with China, especially in the event of a Taiwan contingency.
Seoul's defense ministry explained there hasn't been any discussions with Washington over a possible troop reduction. The Pentagon reportedly said there were no policy announcements to make. 배은지, Arirang News.
Trade officials of Korea and the U.S. ended their latest technical talks in Washington, where the U.S. reportedly addressed non-tariff barrier issues. A tangible deal is expected under the new Korean government. Moon Ji-young has the latest.
South Korea and the U.S. concluded the second round of working-level consultations in Washington, D.C. on Thursday. These talks come as South Korea seeks to negotiate product-specific tariff and the reciprocal tariff imposed by the Donald Trump administration. The Korean delegation, led by Jang Sung-gil, Director General of Trade Policy at the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, met with officials from the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. The technical discussions focused on 6 key areas: balanced trade, non-tariff measures, economic security, digital trade, country of origin, and commercial considerations. The U.S. side reportedly raised specific issues concerning Korea's non-tariff barriers, as detailed in the USTR's report from late March. That report listed 21 measures, including restrictions on imports of U.S. beef from cattle over 30 months old, digital trade barriers, and the offset defense trade policy. Washington wants Seoul to lower non-tariff barriers and expand imports from the U.S. to reduce trade deficits. The South Korean government intends to conclude negotiations with the U.S. after a new president takes office following the upcoming June 3rd election.
And once the election's over, then the new government, actually the administration team, is going to start negotiating. So if they make too much hasty decisions, and then if the new government is going to just, to flip everything, that's going to be super costly in terms of both reputation and also actual, the time and efforts.
Seoul aims to minimize the rates of the Trump administration's new duties, including 25% reciprocal tariff, as well as sectoral tariff, including 25% levies on automobiles, steel, and aluminum before July 8th, when Trump's 90-day suspension of reciprocal tariff ends. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
The U.S. is ending Harvard University's eligibility to enroll foreign students amid tensions between the school and the Trump administration, which is expected to affect hundreds of international students in that school. Lee Seung-jae has the details.
The Trump administration has barred Harvard University from enrolling international students moving forward. According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security on Thursday, it has revoked the school's Student and Exchange Visitor Program certification, saying that Harvard has created an unsafe campus environment by permitting anti-American, pro-terrorist agitators to harass and physically assault individuals, including many Jewish students, and otherwise obstruct its once venerable learning environment. The DHS added that many of the agitators are foreign students. The latest ban also means that currently enrolled students at the Ivy League school must transfer or lose their legal status. The move comes as Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem ordered the DHS to terminate the school's Student and Exchange Visitor Program certification due to the university's refusal to hand over the conduct records of international students as requested last month. In an interview with Fox News on Thursday, Noem said that her department is absolutely considering similar measures for other universities, including Columbia University. She stressed that what has happened to Harvard should be a warning to all other universities to get their act together. The Trump administration's revoking of Harvard's Student and Exchange Visitor Program certification means 6,800 international students enrolled in the school must transfer to keep hold of their legal status in the U.S. 이승재, Arirang News.
Marc Chagall is well known as a master of color, memory, and emotion. Starting today, his timeless works are now on view here in Seoul. Our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin takes us inside a rare exhibition of the artist world for this week's Arts and Culture segment.
Art has a unique ability to transcend time. One artist who has the power is Marc Chagall, often called the painter-poet of the 20th century. Chagall's works are known to blur the lines between dreams and reality, blending tradition with innovation, and where colors become emotions. More than 100 of his pieces have arrived in Korea for the Marc Chagall Beyond Time exhibition.
At first glance, Chagall's works may seem playful, full of vivid color and fairy tale-like shapes. But if you take a closer look, you'll be drawn into layers of meaning and emotion.
Chagall's works have visited Korea before, but this exhibition offers something never seen before.
These 7 works are privately owned, so it took months of persuasion to bring them here. As this exhibition marks 40 years since Chagall's passing, we hoped Korea would be the first place to unveil them.
Also drawing attention is Chagall's trademark, stained glass and ceiling works. Large-scale projections and soundscapes have recreated the ceiling of the Palais Garnier in Paris and stained glass windows from Israel's Hadassah Medical Center.
Stained glass and ceiling paintings aren't something you can display like traditional canvases. So we thought hard about how to present that part of Chagall's world. In the end, we created 2 immersive spaces, bringing in sound engineers and designing the setup with symbolic visual elements.
Rather than organizing his works chronologically, the exhibition unfolds through 8 thematic sections based on Chagall's life, such as his major commissions, Love for Paris, and Flowers.
We hope this exhibition isn't just an encounter with Chagall the artist, but with Chagall the human being. The paintings reflect his emotional journey, joy, sorrow, longing, and love.
You can explore Marc Chagall Beyond Time until September 21st at Seoul Art Center's Hangaram Art Museum. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
K-pop girl band aespa's hit Supernova won Best Song Asia, one of the main categories of the Music Awards Japan held in Kyoto on Thursday. On the second day of its 2-day ceremony, K-pop boy group 17 was also recognized with the special award Korean Popular Music for God of Music. And RM of BTS received Best of Listener's Choice for his collaboration with pop star Megan Thee Stallion. The debut edition of the Music Awards Japan was supported by major local music agencies and governmental organizations. In other news, the strategy of Korea's esports industry is to lower barriers and raise opportunities for all players with potential via inclusive competitions and more. Our Lee Eun-hee explores those events.
This group of people are university students in their everyday lives. But for this moment, they are the stars of the stage as gamers. The 2025 Gyeonggi Esports Festival has kicked off at Kintex, bringing together a diverse range of participants. This annual event strives to reshape the perception of esports and make it an integral part of everyday culture by making it more accessible. This year, the introduction of a tournament for disabled players adds greater meaning to the event. It shares the message that regardless of physical limitations, everyone can connect and enjoy the experience of gaming.
I have an intellectual disability, which makes it hard to express my emotions. I joined this tournament because it features a game I'm familiar with, so I felt confident. Whatever the result, I try to accept it and move forward.
Being here on the ground, we can clearly see just how much interest people of all ages in South Korea, a global gaming powerhouse, have in a wide variety of games. But beyond the popularity, what's truly striking is the growing effort to nurture new talents in the industry. Debuting this year, the 2025 Korean Esports League kicked off with eternal return matches at the festival and continues with competitions across the country, including PUBG Mobile and FC Mobile tournaments. Hosted by the Culture Ministry and co-organized by the Korea Esports Association alongside leading game developers including Krafton and Nexon Korea, the league aims to strengthen the foundation of the country's esports ecosystem. With teams from 14 regions participating, the league runs through October, providing a platform for the next generation of esports stars, the future fakers of Korea. Coming up in June, the Global Esports Forum hosted by the Korea Esports Association will bring together international experts to discuss global standards in esports, with Korea leading the conversation and paving the way for rising talents to take the global stage. 이은희, Arirang News. It seems like the early summer-like heat has subsided. The daytime temperature in Seoul today and tomorrow will be 23 degrees Celsius, similar to the average temperature for this time of year. However, rain is forecast in the north-central parts of the country, the south coast and Jeju Island from tonight. It will then expand to other parts of the country tomorrow. The expected amount of rainfall will be up to 60 millimeters on Jeju Island, 20 millimeters on the south coast, and 5 to 10 millimeters in other areas. Please prepare in advance if you have plans outside. Tomorrow morning, Seoul, Gwangju, Busan will start off at 14 degrees, Jeju at 15 degrees. Highs will move up to 19 degrees in Daejeon, 15 degrees in Gyeongju. The early summer-like heat is expected to make a return from Sunday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching and have a great weekend.
How to survive in Korea. One room,
So, you're surviving in Korea. If you've signed a contract for a one-room, obviously you're a pro. But the real deal begins now. Step 1. Housewarming. No need to buy toilet paper, diffusers or hand soap. You'll get them soon enough as housewarming gifts. And some are bound to pile up. There's nothing better to serve your guests than milpaeyu nabe. If you have Korean friends coming over, don't forget the extra garlic. Step 2. Garbage disposal. With great power comes great responsibility. You've had a good time, so let's get to work. It might be tempting to sweep everything into a trash can, but you have to separate your garbage. Not bothered? Beware that negligence is punished with a fine or public humiliation. Step 3. Drying rack. You're excited to live alone in Korea, but the fate of these items, hanger, storage, or a hanger. Go get fresh coffee outside. Jogging doesn't cost anything, and nothing beats instant rice. But keep one item around so that you don't get too lonely. Step 4. Pros of living alone. No mum. Cons of living alone. No mum. A new towel doesn't magically appear. You have to do the laundry regularly. If anyone gives a towel as a souvenir, take it. Get rid of mold immediately. Don't be lazy with the vacuum cleaner. Housework is an endless affair. Overwhelmed? Give your mum a call and thank her for everything she's done. Did you survive in your one room? Wait, you have an unwanted visitor. Call someone you fancy. Could be the right person for the job.
Your gateway to Korea, simply K-pop. Hello everyone, I'm your Simply MC Taewi of AB6.
It's great to see you again. I'm your special MC, actress Hwang Ji-ah. Hello.
Welcome back.
Then this week's Simply K-pop.
Gateway to Korea.
Don't miss out.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
The global economy stands at a crossroads, caught in the crossfire of an escalating tariff war that's shaking markets and rattling confidence worldwide. Just last month, the IMF slashed its growth forecast, signaling deeper trouble ahead as trade tensions between the U.S. and China flare up and ripple across the globe. As for South Korea, an export-driven powerhouse, the stakes couldn't be higher, facing stalled growth, soaring risks, and tough choices ahead. So on Within the Frame tonight, we hear from Danny Leipziger, professor of international business and international affairs at George Washington University, who is also the former vice president of the World Bank, for a clear-eyed view on how this trade battle will shape the world economy and what it means for Korea's future. Welcome to the program, Professor Leipziger.
Glad to be with you.
Thank you for joining us. So let's start right away. Like I've said last month, the IMF has revised its global economic growth forecast for this year down from 3.3 to 2.8%. This reflects concerns over, President Donald Trump's tariff policies. Professor, how would you assess the current state of the global economy?
Well, I think the global economy is struck by a very high level of uncertainty. And I think whenever you have that kind of uncertainty, it reduces consumption, it reduces investment, it makes everyone nervous, and that's not good for economic growth. So I believe that the downgrade by the IMF is totally understandable. And the longer the really high tariff threats persist, the longer this uncertainty will dominate, and that's going to be very bad for a lot of economies, including South Korea. Definitely.
So the IMF downgrade actually highlights real concerns about global growth amid these trade tensions. Then, Professor, not really long after his inauguration, U.S. President Donald Trump has been pursuing tariff policies as a means to address America's debt problem. As an economic expert yourself, what is your take on this approach by U.S. President Donald Trump? And do you believe tariffs can positively contribute to debt management?
Well, I'm not sure I agree that his motivation is related to the management of debt. I believe his primary focus is to gain tariff revenues so that he can provide some tax benefits for the wealthy. And I think the new bill that's in the Congress reflects that concern. I think his second motivation is sort of a 19th century view of trade, in which trade imbalances are all bad. I think that's contrary to what most economists would argue. And in fact, the U.S. Has benefited tremendously by being able to sell its government paper. And some countries will have surpluses, some will have deficits. The real issue there is whether the surpluses in trade with the U.S. are caused by intervention by the government or it's just market forces. So I don't believe that debt management is the primary concern of the Trump administration.
Right. So other than debt management, there are more priorities for President Trump. Now, the U.S. and China, after a prolonged tariff war, recently struck a dramatic agreement to each reduce tariffs by 115 percentage points through trade negotiations. Though this has definitely alleviated some uncertainty in the global economy, there still are concerns about a potential recession. What's your outlook on this regard, Professor?
Well, I think the ability of the U.S. and China to begin talking is definitely positive. I wouldn't read too much into it. I mean, the initial tariff levels were exorbitant on both sides. So putting a halt to that for a period of time is useful. Where these negotiations will end up is harder to say. I mean, the Trump administration in its first inception was very keen on punishing China, and I think that motivation, coming from the fact that the administration believes that China is subsidizing its exports and doing damage to global trade by controlling critical minerals, et cetera, means that I think the battle between the U.S. and China will continue. So this is a useful step to de-escalate, but I wouldn't read that much into it. I think we actually have to see where the two parties come out after some serious talks.
Right. So while the tariff has reduced some, uncertainty, there still are underlying risks to it. Then on top of that, Washington and Beijing has also agreed to a 90-day mutual tariff suspension. And this leaves room for speculations that the tariff war is not yet over, like what you've just mentioned. In your view, what are the most important factors in ensuring that both sides adhere to this tariff agreement?
Well, I think we'll see what emerges. I think it's too early to really see what the contours of that arrangement might be. China does have some significant non-tariff barriers, and the U.S., I think, feels that China has been misbehaving in certain sectors, be it in steel or aluminum or others. So I think some of these key areas need to be dealt with. But then I think we have the longer term problem, which is dealing with technology transfers, artificial intelligence, electric cars, et cetera. And I think it's inevitable there will be competition between the first and the second largest economies in the world. The question is, are there some rules on how that competition proceeds? Or are we in this sort of Wild West world in which, I put big tariffs on you and you retaliate? I think, if China were pursuing its industrial policies and were the size of, Paraguay or another small economy, I don't think the global economy would suffer and we wouldn't care. But given that China is the second largest and growing still rapidly, I think how it behaves and how the U.S. behaves is just very important for global stability and for global trade.
Right. So coming up with a really definite rule and having trust with both sides, mutual trust, would be also important. Professor, let's also touch upon South Korea's economy. A recent report by state-run Korean think tank forecasts that this year's economic growth for the country would stand at 0.8%, citing sluggish exports and weak domestic demand, also caused by the tariffs. In the past, you've previously emphasized that South Korea is relatively open export markets as part of its growth strategy. So considering the current global trade conditions, how would you view this sub 1% growth forecast now?
Well, I think it's certainly below Korea's potential growth rate that the IMF would put forward, which is above 2. I think the drop in GDP growth can be attributed to a number of factors. Certainly global trade uncertainty is one of them, but I don't think we should underestimate domestic factors. I think there's been an unprecedented amount of domestic uncertainty and concern. You have an election coming up in a couple of weeks. And I think that, consumers, when faced with uncertainty, reduce their spending. And I think the same is true for investors. So I think there are some issues in Korea, and you know them fairly well. I think in the long term, we're talking about demographics and fiscal challenges. I think in the medium term, we're talking about the fact that Korea is stuck with a security arrangement with the U.S. and a lot of economic ties with China, which puts it in a very vulnerable position. And in the short term, we have the tariff problem and what that means for economic growth and the operations of many of the major chaebols. So I think there are short-term issues around trade, there are medium-term issues around the relationship between the U.S. and China, and there are long-term issues having to do with demographics. So all of these things lead to the possibility of lower growth in the future. And I think that's not something that is very convenient, given the demographics of Korea, in which it's going to be harder and harder for the working population to support the non-working population. So a growth rate below 1%, obviously concerning.
Right. Now, as we've been touching upon trade as we spoke, the South Korea's trade talks, working level officials from South Korea and the U.S. held a second technical meeting in Washington on tariff issues a few days ago. As negotiations begin to gain traction, it's likely that the contents of the so-called July package will be left to the next Korean administration. Professor, what kind of strategic approach do you think South Korea's new government should take in trade talks with America?
Well, it's a very good question. I think the first issue is that I wouldn't leave it to the new administration to set the parameters of these negotiations. I think that's why you have good negotiators and good technocrats who can lay the groundwork. Yes, it has to be endorsed by the new administration, but I think a lot of work has to be done before then. In terms of how to deal with the U.S. on this issue, I think we have seen now the trade agreement between the U.S. and the U.K., so that gives us some lessons for how to deal with the administration. But it also has to take into account the fact that the U.S. trade deficit with Korea has more than doubled between 2021 and 2024. Now it's, I believe, in the range of $55 billion. So for an administration that views these bilateral deficits as a concern, I think the negotiators will have to find some ways to bring that Korean surplus down. And I think there's some things out there having to do with increased purchases, perhaps, of agricultural products, of Boeing aircraft, and even some investments in LNG. There's been some discussion about this Alaska pipeline. So I think the U.S. administration likes to show big wins. The strategy for the Koreans is to allow the announcement effects of these big wins to carry the day, while actually negotiating things that make sense from the vantage point of South Korea.
Right. So we should take lessons from previous deals with other countries and also expand areas of cooperation in different industries as well. Now, beyond external factors like, declining exports due to tariffs, what about domestic risks in the Korean economy? What do you think is the Korean economy? What kind of risks do you think the Korean economy is facing domestically? You previously pointed out that the aging demographic and a shrinking workforce pose significant challenges. Could you assess the long-term impact of these issues?
Well, I believe, yes. The long-term impact is that it will put a greater fiscal burden on government. And so the question there is some further redesign of pensions required? Something need to be done in the tax system? There's some issues that are longer term. But given the demographics, we know exactly what Korea's population will look like 18 years from now. So these are things that I've written about in the past, and I think Korean officials were aware of. Is just each administration feels that they can pass it on to the next and not deal with these issues. So I think that's the long-term challenge. I think the immediate concerns, if there are any, for me, are more in the area of the housing issue. I think, again, Korea's household debt as a proportion of, disposable income is among the highest in the OECD. 2/3 of the mortgages are still floating rate, which makes them more vulnerable and uncertain. And it makes the life of the central bank more difficult because, their main objective is to fight inflation and have financial stability. But there's also this concern about the housing market. So I think, for a new administration coming in, obviously they're going to have to deal with trade as the first agenda item. But I think that there are some other structural issues having to do with the way the housing market functions, and the way that fiscal policy is structured, given the demographics, that a responsible administration should be tackling.
Right. So as you've mentioned, South Korea's household debt is definitely at an all-time high. With U.S. maintaining high interest rates, how do you think this combination could threaten South Korea's economy specifically, and what kind of solutions could you suggest in this area?
Well, I think at the moment interest rates are still reasonably high. I don't think we know exactly what the Federal Reserve is going to be doing over the course of the next 6 to 12 months because of this great uncertainty having to do with trade and the global economy. So if it turns out that the tariffs push inflation up in the U.S., which is not unlikely, then the Fed would want to keep rates very high and tight. If, on the other hand, the global economy suffers more than the IMF projections and the U.S., is in recession, then it places a great challenge on the central bank in the U.S. Do they fight inflation? Do they fight recession? But to your point, I think interest rates in the U.S. have some impact on interest rates in other countries. But I think basically the central bank, the Bank of Korea, has done a good job in dealing with inflation and setting rates at a level that deters inflation but doesn't cause great distress in debt markets or in the housing sector. So it becomes more complicated, but I think you have a very capable governor, and I think he'll be able to manage that. I believe the trade issues are perhaps more dominant in terms of risk factors than are the monetary policies in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. So we've been touching upon trade, household debt, and South Korea's demographics. Professor, what about beyond this, beyond the issues that have already been discussed? What kind of other risks do you think we should be paying close attention to in the current economic environment?
Well, I think, honestly speaking, one of the things that I think countries should avoid are self-inflicted wounds. Now, obviously, in the U.S., with the current administration, we are inflicting a lot of wounds on ourselves. That's unfortunate. But when we turn to South Korea, we see that divisive politics over the course of a number of years has made it more difficult for Korea to deal with the challenges that we've been talking about. It's very hard to deal with the trade issues, fiscal issues, housing, whatever, when you have two parties that would like to spend most of their time attacking one another rather than dealing with some of these concerns. So my concern in terms of risk is that the continuation of this strife between the two major parties will be at the expense of the Korean economy and the Korean people. I think that uncertainty and backtracking on policies is really detrimental. And Korea is in a good position. However, as I mentioned, it faces these challenges, the short-term challenges of the tariff war, the medium-term challenges of relying on the U.S. for security and China's trade, and then in the longer-term demographics. So all of these things, short, medium, and long-term, require governments that can forge some sort of consensus and use perhaps bipartisan commissions or committees to try and move the agenda forward on some of these structural problems in a less politicized way. So I think the big challenge for Korea right now, it may well be internal.
Right. That seems to be a critical point. All these policies center on, of course, the government and the legislative body. And let's hope for the next government to support these kinds of policies as well. Now, before we let you go, Professor, drawing from your experience at the World Bank, what would you believe should be the top economic policy priority for South Korea's incoming administration?
Well, I think what I just said, the political economy issue is number one for me. I have not been very optimistic about how policy is being made because of this internal stress. So whoever wins, I think the first challenge is to try to force some sort of cohesion between the various factions so that Korea can more effectively deal, A, with the tariff issues with the U.S., and B, with some other structural considerations, such as the fact that the China market is changing and China is trying to be much more self-sufficient, which means that there's going to be less trade going in that direction. The issues having to do with critical minerals and metals is really important. And then the issues of fiscal policy. So I think that many of these things are manageable. They won't disappear, but they're manageable. But they're only manageable if the technocrats are supported by the political forces. I think that once you take issues and politicize them, and we've seen this in the US, we've seen it in France, we've seen it in the UK, many economic problems become much more difficult to solve when you have this political debate that is quite unhealthy and really is quite divorced from the kinds of policy actions that are required. I think you have good think tanks, you have good ministries, you have people that know what should be done. The problem is they can't get through the National Assembly when the two sides just don't want to play ball with one another. And I should say, coming from the U.S., I understand this because we've had this kind of political gridlock before. But I think in the case of Korea, it's even more urgent that the parties begin to see that they're supposed to work in the national interest and do so in a more cooperative and collegial way.
Right. So it all returns back to better governance and also less political wrangling, of course, to better support and push through with these policies. But I'm afraid we'll have to conclude our discussion at this point. But thank you so much for your time and for making time for us and for your insights tonight, Professor Leipziger. We appreciate it so much.
It's been my pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.
누나가 발레를 하다 보니까